Hello everybody, and welcome to this presentation from Dr. Martin Lohe, who's CEO of Sixonia. Martin is going to be giving us a presentation on in-situ at-scale functionalization towards few-layer graphenes without additives for batteries, textiles and beyond. As always, we'll be taking your questions live at the end of the talk, so please leave them in the sidebar. I'm now going to hand over to Martin, and we'll be here again at the end of his talk. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Chris, for the nice introduction, and welcome everybody to this presentation about functionalized graphene. And I will basically just jump right into it. So Sixonia is basically a growing startup that is located in Dresden in Germany, so like 2 hours south of Berlin. And we are actually a spin-off that was created in 2017 from the local university here. And unlike most of the graphene spin-offs you might have seen or met, we are completely owned by our founders team, and we are not working with investors, but really growing rather organically, let's say. But I think we've done a pretty decent job so far. So every year since 2017, we basically were able to double our turnover, which obviously also comes to some extent from public funding, but we are also actually moving really ahead in scaling our process and selling our materials. So before we start going into the really technical part of what we are doing, I would like to remind everybody of you or tell you, if you're not aware, that what exactly is graphene. So, and I don't want to do it from a chemical or physical perspective, but really from the ISO perspective. So graphene is actually carbon with a limited thickness. So officially a material should only be called graphene if it's obviously mostly made of carbon and has a thickness that is in the range of 1 to maximum 10 layers and an aspect ratio that's larger than 10 to the power of 2. So I mean, if you don't have an AFM instrument sending around, you're getting graphene. A good indicator would be that the sheets that you're looking at, for example, in an SEM, are flexible rather than really stiff platelets, because that's something that usually only happens when the aspect ratio is really in that high range. So, okay, so now that we have clarified that, what are actually the demands of industrial users? So in a graphene survey in 2020, where more than 800 people were contributing, it was basically, it's clear that people who work with graphene, they need different characteristics. And one that was mostly requested was that the material should be dispersible, or in other words, should be processable. And still, another very important aspect for most applications is that it should have a high electrical conductivity. So the market really wants both, and to have both in a single material, in the case of graphene, you would usually need a functionalized graphene, because I will talk a little bit about that on the next slide, actually. So if you're talking about graphene as a material, and you're not talking about electronic applications where you might use CVD, so the only real pathway towards large-scale production will be a top-down process. And what you have to be aware of in that case is that there are different production processes, and they all have a strong influence on the graphene quality on the one hand, which will mainly is an indicator of defects, but which will influence properties like dispersibility, for example, or processability. And on the other hand, the graphene morphology, which I already mentioned in the beginning. So this is looking into the thickness, lateral size, aspect ratio, or stiffness of the material. And all these different production processes really have a strong effect on let's say, the bulk behavior. So if you're making a composite out of your graphene or an electrode or something, the conductivity, the barrier properties, and the processability of the graphene that you are working with is really very strongly depending on the production method that the graphene was made with. And I will just give you a short example about a very popular process in the graphene community, which is the mechanical exfoliation, so also called liquid phase exfoliation. So in an ideal world, you would really have shear forces that work nicely parallel to your graphite sheets, and you would exfoliate nice, perfect graphene without defects, without any kind of functionalization, because it's a purely physical process. Obviously, if you're doing that on a large scale and not with a Scotch tape, for example, the